out of time for questions. Couple more. The boss has just said I can take a couple more questions. She just said I can take a couple more questions. You got me to go? Okay. Okay. So I can tell. All right. Thank you. All right. So I'm hearing that some people are in trouble. I'm hearing that I can take more questions, but I have to tell you that this conversation will be continued today at 3:15 p.m. The room will be announced later today, so just pay attention and look for it. And we can take, oh yeah, right, see? We can take two questions.
Point of personal privilege, Mr. Chairman.
The two questions.
Point of personal privilege.
I think I got to take the questions. Yes. Who's running this meeting?
The parliamentarian is sitting here at the right-hand corner, and the chair is Sister Thomas over there.
Madam,
so I'm asking for a point of personal privilege.
What do I do?
We have people who actually...
The privilege that I'm asking for, sir, is this. We have a number of trade union organizations in this room who are trying to learn and be more involved in the issue of climate and climate change. And as they come to the mic and ask questions that are specific to the industries that they represent, I only ask that the chair hear them clearly instead of blocking what they are trying to explain to you so that they can get their voices heard. I thank you for that point of privilege.
Thank you.
So that they can get their voices heard. I thank you for that point of privilege.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, CBTU. Okay, this side has had their coffee or whatever they need in the morning. This side I'm not so sure about. Good morning, CBTU. Okay, I'm going to try this one more time because I sometimes, when I'm not as bad as my mama would not like me to be, go to a black church, and I need a little bit of love from you all down in the pews down here. Good morning, CBTU. Good morning. All right. Thank you very much. I want to thank Peyton Wilkins for all of his hard work in helping to assemble this panel. I want to thank the folks from the CBTU for having us have this conversation. And I want to also extend lots of thanks to our illustrious panelists, Donnell Wilkins, Jackie Patterson, Donnell Wilkins of the Green Door Institute in Detroit, Michigan, Jackie Patterson from the NAACP, and Eric Mann with Los Angeles, oops, I forgot.
Labor
Community Strategy Center. Thank you. I've known Eric for years, and that bobble should not have happened. I apologize. I'm the moderator for today's panel. I'm Cecil Corbin-Mark. I'm with We Act for Environmental Justice in Harlem. Thank you. Harlem's in the house. I appreciate that. Thank you. All right. I know, right? I want to just quickly set the table for this panel. Our charge is to share with you the intersections between why the labor movement and why communities of color need to be working together on this issue of the climate crisis. For those of us who are on this panel, this is a no-brainer for us. But for many of our brothers and sisters who are in labor, this may not be yet something that you have pulled together as a key frontline set of thoughts for yourselves. And so today we just want to explore why particularly those of us organizing in communities of color around the issue of climate believe that we desperately need our partners in labor at all levels, the local level, the state level, and most critically the national level, to really be deeply engaged on this conversation with what we describe as frontline communities. Those are communities that are on the ground, whether they are African American, Black communities, Latino communities, Asian American communities, indigenous peoples in the United States, why they are on the front line of the climate crisis. It's not because we choose to be at the front of this line, but it is indeed because our communities are the ones that are described in the United Nations Interpanel Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report as described as being those that are most vulnerable. It's because many of our communities have the least and most limited resources to be able to confront the climate crisis. It's because many of our communities are already in harm's way when it comes to the climate crisis. If we look at certain things like the many days in our summers where we have heat waves, our communities are already experiencing some of the negative effects of climate crisis. Just by show of hands, how many of you have allergies or experience hay fever or any of that sort of stuff during the summertime? I know I do. I'm suffering with it already today. Well, those communities are on the front lines of the climate crisis because as the climate changes and as our weather patterns create increased levels of pollen in our neighborhoods, we are experiencing these challenges first and worst, as some of these reports tell us. The other reason that our communities are on the front lines of this climate crisis is also because our communities are also home to the extractive industries that are fueling the climate crisis. So the extraction of oil, the extraction of coal, the extraction of natural gas, to the point of essentially pillaging the earth and her ability to keep the climate in the right space that it should be. Those industries are happening on the ground in our communities. And while they may indeed be creating employment for some of our folks, they are fueling this existential crisis, and they are indeed also harming our communities in terms of the health of our residents in communities of color across this country. And so we see this possibility of building stronger and ever clearer connections between the labor union, some of which is already going on, some of which has been long-standing, but much of which still needs to get deeper and better as one of the tools that is necessary in the fight for fixing the climate challenge that we are confronting. And so I'm going to turn to our panelists and engage both in some presentation and some questions and answers as we sort of trot out for you why we believe this is a critical partnership and why we hope that as CBTU, in addition to sort of marching forward towards the 2020 elections, that wherever you stand in the labor movement, that you will join us in the environmental justice movement, in the social justice movements for fighting for the climate crisis and protecting our communities as we look to put policies in place that will both protect the climate, make sure that our economy transitions away from the fossil fuel use in a way that is both just and equitable, and make sure that in that transition that our communities are not just seen as workers, but potential owners of the future means of production moving forward. And so I'm going to stop talking now, and I'm going to invite Eric Mann to kick off with 5 minutes of a conversation starter for us, and then we will all engage in some dialogue and questions around our piece. So, Eric.
Yeah. Good morning. Can you hear me, everybody? So my name is Eric Mann, and I'm with the Labor Community Strategy Center in Los Angeles. My roots go back to the Congress of Racial Equality in Harlem in 1964, Newark Community Union Project. I work with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee with the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. And if it has black in the name, from Black Panther to League of Revolutionary Black Struggle to working with Lou Moy at the United Auto Workers, I've been part of it. I've been an assembly line. I've been an assembly line worker for over 10 years at the UAW at both the Ford Milpitas and at General Motors in Van Nuys. And I led a movement to keep the GM Van Nuys plant open for 10 years, which was mainly a black and Latino plant in which we built the Labor Community Coalition, which meant the black and Latino community is the reason we were able to keep that plant open. Now, I just want to say a very few things and then just outline form. One is that I think the root of this problem really is in 1492. It really is, with the Europeans coming here to savage. They are the savages and they're the barbarians who came to these shores and wiped out 100 million people who had built up an advanced civilization since 16,000 years before the Europeans, and they were able to wipe out 90% of the population in a century. And unfortunately, that's not ancient history, because today we have 1 million black people in prison. We have the indigenous people stuck on reservations with no real land rights, and we have Latinos being locked up as prisoners in their own country. So the reason I say that is because you can't build a democracy on a base of genocide. I don't believe you can. And you can't expect a country based on genocide to solve the climate crisis, which means that it's going to take CBTU, it's going to take the NAACP, it's going to take all of us to build a movement to not just change the economy, but change the whole worldview of this country. And then the last two thoughts I just want to say is, one is that in Los Angeles, we have a campaign for free public transportation and stop the attack on black passengers, because they're charging people $100 a month to ride these buses and trains, and when you can't afford it, you're arrested for so-called fare evasion. And I'll tell you right now that people can't afford anything, and they're gonna arrest people for everything if we don't stop it. So the last thing I want to say is the role of books. I have 2 books here. One is called Playbook for Progressives, The 16 Qualities of a Successful Organizer, and the other is called, this is Katrina's Legacy, The Black Nation and the People of the World Confront the U.S. Imperialist White Settler State and its Genocidal Climate Crimes. And to make clear what genocidal climate crimes, there's 100,000 people missing from New Orleans because of Katrina, and sub-Saharan Africa is in grave, grave danger because of the emissions. So let's build a movement and let's build this conversation.
Thank you, Eric. What I want to do is start with an opening question to further illuminate for this audience of CBTU. I want to lay the groundwork for them in having them have a better understanding of what's going on in communities of color across this country. Can we talk a little bit about the issue of how the environment and people's health are interconnected, and how, especially for African American communities, Black communities, and other communities of color, these are not healthy times. And so I wanted to start with Donnell, and then move to Jackie, and then come back to Eric as well.
Okay. So good morning, everyone. Again, I'm Donnell Wilkins, and I am with the Green Door Initiative, which is in the city of Detroit. And that, all right, D's in the house, okay.
The D is in the house.
And so actually been working and fighting this fight since the early, since the early 90s, but I'm going to just share real quickly my labor roots and how I got into the environmental justice work, because it was my activism and organizing around health and safety in the workplace, and particularly interested in Black workers who are disproportionately impacted by being in the worst kind of jobs and really not being involved back then in as they could be in the occupational health and safety advocacy work. So my COSH groups, Coalitions on Occupational Safety and Health, allowed me to go into the plants, work with workers, work with various unions to bring attention to those issues, because we weren't really retiring and being able to enjoy our retirement. You may know a lot of people who once retired, 2-3 years out, they're gone. And they're gone because they've been exposed to chemicals and that kind of thing. What got me into the environmental justice work was I had an opportunity to attend the first environmental justice conference or summit, it wasn't called that, but in 1991, and why could he not breathe? And this is a common issue. Places like Detroit, Harlem, where we are heavily populated, LA, we are disproportionately impacted with asthma, and they're linking it to air pollution and air quality. If we could limit it to air quality, I don't know anyone in this room who can live without air. I'd like to meet you. okay, or oxygen. I need to meet you. I need to meet someone who cannot live without water, right? Because the incident in Flint, Michigan, where 12,000 children, all right, Flint, I hear you, 12,000 children were poisoned by their drinking water and poisoned with lead. When you talk about health impacts, this is something that we're dealing with. When you cannot breathe, when you cannot access water for not only consumption, but use. And recently, just yesterday, I saw in the news a story that Flint has even been advised not to try to drink their water because of PFAS. Now, Donnell, what is PFAS? You're hearing that a lot in the news. Well, every one of us need to be concerned about that in our own communities, because it is an impact that comes from a variety of really complicated chemicals that get dumped into our water systems. And because our water infrastructure may not be designed to process that in a way that keeps us healthy and clean and safe, it has become a major problem. So those things are just a few of the items with regard to public health and the reason that we depend on our environment to be healthy, clean, for us all to thrive.
Jackie?
Sure, thank you. Thank you. So it's an honor to be here with you all today. I was born on the south side of Chicago. Anybody from Chicago in the house? Thank you. And I was born knowing about unions. It was my father was a diesel mechanic, and from as early as I understood language, I remember my father talking about the importance of being a member of his union, and how they fought for the rights of him as one of the workers in this large company where he worked on diesel trucks. And fast forward to today, my father died in 2011 it was complications from just pulmonary fibrosis, which they counted for environmental exposures in terms of how they thought that evolved, because he never smoked a day in his life, but yet he came up with this illness that they weren't able to cure. And we live within about 30 miles of two coal-fired power plants in Chicago, and coal-fired power plants are known to contribute to respiratory illnesses, from asthma to chronic pulmonary disease and so forth. And so I wonder about those connections in terms of where we lived and how my father died prematurely, really, of this disease that usually is striking people who smoke, and he never smoked, as I said. So when we do this work now, I think about the communities that I've met with. I met with someone in Indiana who worked in a coal-fired power plant and had died prematurely. I met with someone that person didn't die, who's the daughter of a person who died from lung disease, and he lived in a coal-fired power plant, never smoked a day in his life, and she also attributes that to his environmental exposure. And so I'm excited to have, as chair of this initiative we started 18 months ago called the Black Labor Initiative on Just Transition, and Peyton Wilkins of the CBTU is the chair of that initiative that the NAACP has started, because we really want to be accountable to labor in the work that we're doing around transitioning away from industries and practices that are harming our communities and harming workers. We wrote a op-ed on black lung disease that's affecting folks who are working in the coal mines. As you know, 76,000 coal miners have died of black lung disease since 1968, while the National Mining Association, that's supposed to be protecting the health of their workers, has fought against the type of protections that they would have gotten over the years. And so we consider ourselves to be accountable to the workers who are affected from a transition away from an industry that's harming workers and communities. And so when we think about, we put all of these stories together, whether it's my father or the father in Indiana or the child in Florida who is now having to be dependent on medicines to be able to breathe from day to day, who lives 2 miles away from a coal-fired power plant, but is often out of school. His parents are out of work, taking him to the hospital constantly just so he can breathe. Another child who isn't able to go to school like other kids because of the poor air quality days. We know African American children are 3 to 5 times more likely to enter in the hospital from asthma attacks and 2 to 3 times more likely to die of asthma attacks. We know in Chicago, the Harvard School of Public Health found that the 2 coal-fired power plants that were near my home were that 40 asthma deaths and 1,000 hospitalizations every single year were accountable to those 2 coal-fired power plants. And so this is the work that we do to try to address those, but wanting to make sure that we are accountable to Black labor to ensure that there isn't a negative impact as we make this transition. So thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. So from marathon refineries in Detroit to coal-fired power plants in Chicago, situations in Indiana. Eric, can you tell us a little bit about the ground in Los Angeles and how these extractive industries are impacting the health of communities of color in Los Angeles?
Yeah, and I mean, thank you. I mean, first of all, we're all rooted in this public health beginning of how we understand the environment and the urban crisis. So we began, I was an auto worker, as you know, and was involved in the campaign to keep the plant open. And then when I went to the People of Color Environmental Justice Summit, where Danielle and I were, and Cecil was, and everybody, is I got much more aware of environmental questions. And I went back and found all the emissions that were coming out of the General Motors plant that I had fought to keep open, including the paints and the solvents and the whole industrial processes before we even got the car out the door were killing the community and killing us. So the relationship of health and safety, community safety, racism, you know, we get that. Then I worked on a book called LA's Lethal Air, because we wanted to study the problems of air pollution in Los Angeles. And again, I was shocked. We didn't know, we were not public health scientists, and one thing I'll tell you is that you don't need to be. Certainly in the age of Google. Seriously, I mean, we just started researching this stuff ourselves, and we learned about 1,3-butadiene, and we learned about oxides of nitrogen and reactive organic gases. And there's studies saying that these things kill the rats. They lead to the metastasis of cancer. Not just some create cancers, but others lead to the metastasis of cancer. So it's a chemical society that's been produced. So we try to figure out what to do about it. So we built a group called the Bus Riders Union, which some of you may know about. And there's a film, a wonderful film by Haskell Wexler called Bus Riders Union, which is 3 years of the organizing that we did. And we decided that we were going to focus on, back then, free public transportation. We had a campaign called Billions for Buses. And through a long process, including the federal courts, we won 2,500 compressed natural gas buses to replace the entire diesel fleet. We had a million hours of additional service that we won, and we reduced the fares. So guess what happened? First of all, the federal courts, the right wing went into the federal courts and took away virtually all the civil rights protections that we had won, so we can no longer bring a lot of these class action suits. Then, unfortunately, the Democrats in Los Angeles decided to go back into train construction, and because they didn't like us, because, you know, if you take them to federal court, they say, well, why take me to federal court? Because you violated the Civil Rights Act. They took away the million hours, they raised the fare from $50 to $100, and now we're in a crisis where public transportation is reduced. So the last thing is that I think for all of us, we've gone from an understanding of the environmental crisis to the climate crisis. And in 1991, I wasn't thinking about climate. I was thinking about, you know, we're going to be here forever, and we have to deal with these other issues. And now I'm realizing we may not be here forever because we don't control the conditions of the world in this, you know, is the fundamentally extractive nature of the whole society. So what we're trying to do now is focus a lot on greenhouse gas reduction as well, because all the things that come out of the car and all the things that come out of the factory are both killing you and killing the planet at the same time. And that's sort of the direction we're going in, and the next question I'll deal with what we're trying to do about it. But I think this free public transportation is a critical mass demand for the black community and for communities of color, because people cannot get to jobs. And one more thing, you're always in a conscious raising process. I was yelling, hey, it's great about compressed natural gas. And the brothers and sisters from the indigenous environmental network said, no, you don't know what compressed natural gas is. It's on our reservations and we don't want it. We don't want that extraction. So we have to move to electric, zero emissions, and life is a constant conscious raising process.
Thank you, Eric. I want to move the conversation. So you've heard a little bit about Los Angeles, a little bit about Chicago, a little bit about Detroit. Please do not be fooled to think that these are stories that are unique. I know you know what's going on in your communities. And so what we would ask is that as you leave this space, think about your communities and how some of these issues that we have raised with regards to air pollution, with regards to extractive industries being in the midst of our communities, and how they might be impacting the quality of health in your community as well. So try to make those connections. I want to move the conversation next to, so we've talked about the health realities, we've talked a little bit about the interconnectivity between sort of the production process, whether it's the production of energy through the extraction of oil or natural gas, refining, coal-fired power plants, making electricity, et cetera, the production of autos, and how those emissions get into the air and impact communities in Los Angeles. I want to move us to talk a little bit about the issue of the economy that we are a part of, right? And so tell this audience a little bit more about what's going on. I'm sure they're well aware, but connect those two things for us, the economy and the issue of the climate crisis. Let's do that next, right? So again, Donnell, do you want to kick off?
So part of the work that we do at the Green Door Initiative, we do workforce development, and we provide job training, we provide connecting workers, community folks to jobs, and we also help to leverage those people to help them develop businesses in the green and environmental economy. So for me, this may sound a little weird, but as I observe the conditions that climate change and a poor environment has created, I actually see it as an opportunity, because someone has to clean it up, someone has to rebuild, someone has to create resiliency, someone has to manage. There are jobs in that. And I think this is an important conversation when it comes to the labor movement and the environment, because it's always been seen as jobs versus the environment. Mm-hmm. And I think that that is a false dichotomy. There are opportunities to transition into an environment, an economy that supports a clean environment. So we have this little motto: we restore hope in the people while providing help to the planet. In a feasibility study that I did, the fastest growing jobs is within the green economy. There are opportunities to transition industry to focus on how to make their products most environmentally friendly and supportive of the environment. We have been able to prove that that prediction for jobs is pretty true. 90% job placement. About 2% of our workforce really have started their own businesses and have come back as employers and interviewed. trainees, future trainees. Since 2011, we trained nearly 300 individuals out of the city of Detroit. About a third of them are returning citizens. This is an economy that we all can enjoy. So when you think about the issues of restoring wetlands so that our ecosystems can withstand the big storms, hurricanes, and whatever. That was one of the causes with Hurricane Katrina. A total erosion of beaches and wetlands because the natural ecosystem had been damaged. Well, someone has to rebuild that, restore that. There is much opportunity, and it's a multi-billion-dollar industry if we really wrap our heads around that. We here at CBTU can get in front of this. We need to be at the tables. The Green New Deal is one of those opportunities to get behind now. And I'll let someone who's a little bit more knowledgeable about the Green New Deal talk about that. But you hear it. There are a number of folks we even observed who are considering running for the presidency who have been in discussions about the Green New Deal. And what is preeminent in it is how to address environmental justice impacts and opportunities for us to get engaged in that economy.
So Jackie?
Thank you. Yeah, so a few years ago, the American Association of Blacks in Energy came out with a report that found that the energy sector is a $6 trillion sector, that African Americans hold approximately 1.1% of the jobs in the energy sector, and African American community gains 0.01% of the revenue from the energy sector. But yet, we are more likely to live next to the toxic facilities that are creating our energy. Including, we put out a couple of reports over the last few years chronicling this, cold-blooded, putting profits before people, fumes across the fence line that talked about how we're more likely to live next to the oil and gas industry and the coal industry. And we pay the price for this with our lives, as we said in our other earlier examples. We also found that when we're talking about the energy economy, fossil fuel industry is not only using its profits, its extreme profits. On average, a coal company CEO makes $9.8 million a year, while on average the workers make $33,840 a year, which means the CEOs make on average 289 times the amount of the average worker. And those profits that those companies, those millions of dollars, billions of dollars in profits that the companies make, they put towards not only fighting against clean air and clean water and clean energy and energy efficiency, but they also pay into groups like ALEC that pushes back on everything from workers' rights, pushes forward on school privatization, water privatization, and also voter suppression. And so really the fossil fuel economy is actively working against us while we receive very few benefits from the fossil fuel economy. And so for us, we see that we need to make this transition. So after putting out kind of all the negative reports, including those reports I mentioned, and most recently a report called Fossil Fueled Foolery, we also put out a report called Power to the People, and a report on just energy policies, reducing pollution, creating jobs, really reinforcing what Donnell just said, is that we have so much opportunity in the new energy economy, and that it's time for us to really take the reins of control over the new energy economy. So we're no longer having statistics like African American family making $50,000 a year is more likely to live next to a toxic facility than a white American family making $15,000 a year. We have to change that equation, and we have to change the equations that put us at the bottom of the economic ladder. So we have the power to do that, and that's why we put together the Black Labor Initiative on Just Transition, so that we are positioning Black labor in leadership. That's why we put together initiatives like our Power Up Employment Project, where we're training returning citizens on how to do energy efficiency and solar installation, so that again and then also on how to create businesses, while we're advocating advocating for policies like local hire provisions and disadvantaged business enterprise provisions for women-owned and minority-owned businesses, where we're making sure that we are in the driver's seat when it comes to the new energy economy on all levels. Where we launched the Solar Equity Initiative last year, where we did an installation in Los Angeles on the Genesee Center for Domestic Violence Prevention and Intervention, not only saving the money for that facility so that they could put it towards the much-needed services for the survivors of violence, but also training the women to do solar installations themselves. And now those women are actually employed in the solar industry. And we know the financial security is the biggest antidote towards to be financially secure to get out of domestic violence situations. So there's so many co-benefits and so many intersectional benefits as we make to making sure that we're in the leadership in this new transition, and so many opportunities to do so. Thank you.
So Eric, just close us out on that piece very quickly. And then I'm going to move us to have a bit of a conversation about movements, the environmental justice movement, the labor movement, et cetera. So just close us out on this sort of the economy and how it is sort of fueling and creating these challenges about our crisis.
Well, one thing about movement building is I want to be clear that it's not like Janelle is saying something, and Jackie's saying something, and I'm saying something. We're saying the same thing. So when she chooses to emphasize a point, I want to say that's already been made. Thank you. And then when Jackie makes the point, we're in the same movement together. So I want to just add a third component to this rather than thinking it's a separate component, which is I think we're not paying enough attention to struggling over public money. And we're thinking the economy is only, not we, but they want us to think the economy is only the private sector. In Los Angeles, the MTA has a $7 billion budget. In the county has a $30 billion budget. We're doing work on domestic violence right now, and a lot because a lot of the organizers, the young women of color with whom we work, unfortunately, it's an integral part of their lives. We're working with Peace Over Violence, a group in Los Angeles, to try to understand this. So I want to focus on a couple of things. The system moves in very revolutionary ways that we can't control. They brought slaves here, and we shouldn't agree with that, and then they decided to get rid of the slave system, not for any good reasons. They moved to an industrial system, and then black labor followed the industrial system, and when black people finally got into the job, they said, sorry, we're moving into the technology system. That's virtually all white and some degree Asian Pacific Islander, in which black people are excluded. So there's a lot of forces beyond which we can fully control, although we're trying. And I think another thing we have to do is fight over the public funds, which is a critical part of the economy. There's $1 trillion invested in the defense industry, the warfare industry, that we should be bringing into communities of color and divesting from the war economy and move to that. And the last point I want to say about the economy is that we should be building our own institutions as part of this economy. The Strategy Center now has Strategy and Soul Movement Center. There's a young man named Channing Martinez who's helping to run it. We have our own film theater. We have our own bookstore. We're going to develop strategy and soul food. We're going to develop the fight for the soul of cities. We bought a house. And the reason I'm saying that is because the gentrification that's taking place right now, which is another word for genocide, is we have to start developing black-owned community institutions that we can buy private property and because the individual black homeowner cannot solve the problem of this voracious market. But we can collectively build homes to save people, even if you're dispersed from Harlem. We have institutions in Harlem. I operate right now in South Central Los Angeles, and we're raising money to get community institutions. There's also LA Can, there's COCO, we call it community capital, and I'd like to continue that conversation. So picture all three of us as a continuum, and we'll keep the conversation going.
Great, thank you. I see you. I promise I will get to the questions. That will be my next thing. So what we've talked about a little bit here is the health impacts that some of the extractive economy has laid forward. We've talked about how that negatively impacts communities of color. We've also talked about these links between the economic system, both the privately driven economic parts of our system and the publicly driven parts of our economic system, and how they operate with certain assumptions of how things should be done. A lot of the assumptions are based on sort of extracting these resources from the earth to maximize the amounts of profits that those at the top of those systems get, not the workers, not the communities in which they are extracting from. And that's a model that is flawed and has driven us to the brink of too many greenhouse gas emissions, fueling this climate crisis and exposing communities that are on the front lines to the challenges of poor health, no access to sort of all of the levers of this economy, and the issue of now being on the brink of extinction in terms of the climate crisis. And that's not hyperbole to be able to say that our climate crisis is driving this system, this planet, to extinction. I just want to say that, and have a final discussion here at this group, and then we'll turn to the audience to ask questions. We have seen over the course of the history of social movements in the United States that every time that our economy and our political system drive us towards these challenges where workers are oppressed, their health is threatened, their inability to make a decent wage impacts their ability to sustain their families. The issues of corporate greed and rampant sort of profit seeking for the 1%. We have had social movements that have responded to these things, right? The climate crisis, or the way in which the economy drives towards sort of destruction of the earth as a means of profiteering. We've had movements that have said, no, that's not the balance that we need in a just world, right? And so can we talk a little bit about both the environmental justice movements, its connection and historical work with labor, the environmental movement and its work with labor, and the labor movement and its work with us. And let's lay the table there for this conversation, and then we'll close out and turn to the audience for questions.
So, for those who don't know, I am an active, longtime member and participant of CBTU's CARET team, the Community Action Response Against Toxins, and work very closely, have seen a real benefit to working very closely with the labor movement, particularly in Detroit, to do the work that we do. Because we do not want to be seen as anti-jobs. We don't want to be seen as getting in the way of people making a living. We do actually believe that we can have both. We can have a strong economy, we can have a healthy community, but it has to happen together. And that motto, I would encourage those of you who are not involved at your local level with a local CARET team to get involved, because that motto brings strength to impact public policy and to bring about change in our communities. What's the motto? It is community, environmental justice folks like myself working together with rank and file and leadership of unions, coming together, linking up, having the same voice, speaking the same thing, being of the same mind as we move on these issues. And I am not naive in the idea that this is not an uncomfortable conversation. This is not uncomfortable. I get that. It is. But I do believe we can make things happen, because as we work to improve the community's environmental impacts, that same sort of energy and power can improve inside the workplace, because you're the front line in the workplace when it comes to those exposures. So coming together, united on these issues, help us move forward. And linking our community with the job opportunities that you as organized labor are very familiar with is a strong and powerful statement and a powerful force.
Thank you. Jackie?
Thank you. Yeah, so the union model, like even the word union, is as Donnell as well illustrated, is at the very core of what of the models that we're going to need to survive this climate transition and this climate crisis, really, that we're already in and that will only get worse. We're now putting out a toolkit called Resourcing Revolutionary Resilience, and it's rooted in this notion of it being about the collective in order for us to be able to survive. As we know, there's an African proverb, when spiders unite, they can tie up a lion. We're not into tying up lions as environmentalists, but you get the idea. But the notion is that we really can only survive it together. We can really only survive it united, both at this larger level and then at the local level, really working on, we have these, in this resourcing revolutionary resilience, we use this framework where we look at extractive investment, as Cecil said, inward investment, extractive investment meaning, from corporations that are just coming to get something out of communities, inward investment where even well-meaning foundations or other types of grants, but they come in with strings that maybe take us away from the agenda that the community actually wants. And then there's internal investment where we actually are raising and controlling our own revenue and raising and controlling our own destiny. And that's where we're really pushing towards. So in this toolkit, we're talking about ways that we can build on union models where we're really all coming together collectively, all for one and one for all. So really, we look forward to taking leadership, as we said, through the Black Labor Initiative and otherwise, from the union models and from the union leaders who really know what it takes to have a thriving economy. So that's the kind of partnership and that's the kind of models that we think are going to not only take us through in terms of surviving these crises, but actually thriving. Thank you.
Eric, close us out on that point.
For me, the central question right now is the training of organizers and the rebuilding of an organizing culture. When I was with CORE, I was approached by a black porter named Eddie Barnes from the Trailways bus terminal, and he said that the black porters were not getting jobs as bus drivers, as ticket agents, and information clerks. And I helped to organize with Eddie a boycott of Trailways, and thanks to having a group like CORE, we did Philadelphia, we did New York, we did DC, and we broke the back of Trailways. And this is in the north, or as Penny Lou Hamer would say, down north. We went and we integrated the entire Port Authority, why did it have to be integrated in 1964? Think about that. But it took one Eddie Barnes, frankly, and one Eric Mann to move it. And it took two organizers, one from CORE and one from a rank and file labor group, to eventually, and of course you had to have a group called CORE, to put Trailways on its back. Now today, we've lost the organizing tradition, and a lot of people, even working for nonprofits who call themselves organizers, are just sort of canvassers. And I think that even if the union's organizing budgets are being cut, doesn't matter, you got members, you have voluntary members who can go out after work. I built the whole campaign to keep Van Nuys open out of the local 645 budget, and none of us got paid. We worked in the plant, and then after work, we went out and organized. So I'd like to talk to some of you about our National School for Strategic Organizing, to talk about the role of books, because any theory that we have is going to be based on a person who could be a good group builder, who's able to go out and be a revolutionary educator, and who can rebuild these structures, because black labor is under attack. And I want to end with saying this. You should look around and be truly honored that we have CBTU. In 1972, there are three big events I want you to think about in 1972. One was the candidacy of George McGovern, which was one of the best candidates who ever ran, and therefore the Democratic Party sabotaged him. Number two was the National Black Political Convention, whose slogan was, "It's nation time." And number three was the formulation of the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists in the same year. Think about that. Because that was when there was revolutionary hope for the whole society led by black people, which is why there's been so much punishment of the black community, because of its political leadership and all you've done for all of humanity. So keeping this structure of CBTU, you can say what's wrong with it. I'm in every organization, trust me. There's always a lot wrong with it except you. You're always right, and the organization's always wrong. And if you think that way, you're contributing to the problems that are solution. We have to look around and say we are lucky as hell that CBTU exists, and the Strategy Center and the leadership of Terry Melvin, and yes, the leadership of Peyton Wilkins, who helped us. The Strategy Center, I think all of us would like to talk about how we can help CBTU even more, because truly, all power to the people, and God bless you.
All right. So there was a woman waving a yellow flag. There she is. I had to ask, what is this flag all about? So, ma'am, would you go ahead? I know there are people with questions, and we want to take those questions, and then we will close out. So where is my friend? She was waving. Where's? Number podium. Oh, I have to call the number. Okay. Podium number 5. There was a woman there before you, though, sir. Where is she? Right here. Oh, okay. Yeah. So yes, sir. You're the ones for the question. I get it now. I get the system. Sorry. Can you just quickly give me your question?
I'm going to give you my name first. I'm James Gibbs. I'm International Vice President for the Mine Workers Union.
Yes, Mr. Gibbs.
And I've heard to talk about the green jobs. I just want you to think, and you're talking about protecting the black communities. There is not one lump of coal ever pulled a trigger in the city of Chicago when we're talking about protecting our community. There has never been one lump of coal that turned the pipes and rusted out the pipes in Flint, Michigan, because the politicians changed the water system there and did not ever keep the pipes up in the state of Flint, I mean in the city of Flint.
Yes.
Now, if anybody can keep telling me how coal is destroying this, I understand our science tells us this, but I'll justify that. But when you talk about losing jobs and destroying communities, percentage-wise in the coal fields right now, we have lost we got people unemployed at 32%. I've asked politicians to tell me, how can you take these jobs away and never replace them with anything that makes any...
Yes. And I think what you've heard from us as a panelist, and maybe let me try to punch it up and emphasize it a little bit more. As the environmental justice movement, we are not anti-jobs for any person in our communities. In fact, what many of our organizations are doing are training people to take jobs in the green new economy, and we are actually in some instances organizing households in our communities to create markets so that those people that we train actually will be employed in terms of putting up solar panels, doing energy efficiency, and so forth and so on. But I want to turn to the panel because that goes to the point of just transition. We also clear that the idea of taking brothers and sisters who may have worked decades and their families before them in the coal fields and saying that it is not sufficient. Indeed, it is completely necessary that our policies don't just say we transition from one sector, one means of energy production to the next without a care or regard for those who may fall between the lines or the cracks, if you will, of that economic transition. And so we are very clear that we're not talking about making it the end of coal because it is part of fueling the climate crisis.
But yes, sir.
And then, let me finish, and then not making sure that people are transitioned to the new green economy, not only in the way of accessing jobs, but also accessing means of ownership of that economy moving forward, preferably collectively. So I just want to lay that out. I want the panel to say any other words that they like, and then I want to move to the next question.
Sir, before you speak, and I know I'm out of order, but
okay.
We are people that are fighting for our livelihood.
Okay.
I'm not trying to disagree with the panel. I'm not trying to disagree with anybody in this convention. But let me just tell you now, we are losing our livelihood in these coal fields, and I don't think anybody, no, sir, I understand that. I have to say this.
Can I go to number 3?
It's on my heart. It's on my heart. You have to give me an opportunity to say, this is what I'm saying.
Actually, sir, I need you to respect that you have had a lot of time to speak.
Okay.
I appreciate it. I think you've made the point. Number 3, please. Sir, number 3, quick question.
Kevin Allen, Puget Sound Chapter, CBTU.
Yes.
Snoop Dogg says the game is to be sold, not told. And one of the things that, what's going to be the messaging? How can the concept be sold? There's a lot of telling, but it's not selling. I'm in the state of Washington where our governor is running for president on climate change. That's his primary issue. But yet the initiative that we had for just transition, Initiative 1631 in the state of Washington was blown out
Yes.
2-1.
Yes.
And where they had money for just transition and everything else, and it caused a fissure and a split within our Central Labor Council.
Got you.
And a lot of our organized labor actively campaigned against it. It caused a
So the
chaos.
question is, how do we better tell the story? Is that correct?
How do we sell the story,
we got to
not
sell
tell
the
it?
story, not
Because
just tell the
people want
story.
to see the benefit. This is why we got what we got.
Okay, so to the panelists, anybody want to respond to that? We're not doing a good enough job in this gentleman's eyes of selling the story. So anyone want to respond to that? Quickly, because I'm going to get these two
No, I
questions
totally
in close.
agree with you. I think that there are steps and progression to this deal. And where we have been a little behind is building the resources to get the message out as widely as it needs to be get out. So having this opportunity, for instance, there are people from all corners of this country in this room. We need to come together. I think one of the ways is in that carrot team model to create the kind of message that locally will be embraced. Because this is about local economies as well as national. And so when you talk about Washington State, there really needed to be some training and some messaging developed at the local level because that economy is very unique. And so in order to get that message won over, it has to be something that, we do this, we work this out behind the scenes together.
With
They come
CBTU.
out with CBTU.
We're going to work with
CBTU
CBTU to get that message together.
to get it
right?
out.
And sell
But
the
we gotta
story
be on
correctly.
the same page.
Correct. I'm going to do this really quickly. I need number 1 to give me a question, and then I'm going to go over here because I haven't gone over here at all. Number 4 to give me the question, because they're on my neck about time. The question.
So my question is, hi, my name's Alan Barrett from Local 372. It's around data mining.
Yes.
We've mentioned some data, and
Yes.
I'm going to say the question. So my question is how do we hold government accountable for clear data? And do you all have a reference point as far as which municipalities actually show us how to data mine this type of information? Because governments tend to, just throw data on a website.
Okay. How do we hold government accountable? Remember this. How do we hold government accountable? And do we have any reference points with regards to the data mining itself? Okay. Number 4, I want to make sure and get over there on that side. Question, please.
Charles Jenkins, New York chapter president, by the way of TW Local 100.
Ooh, Mr. Jenkins.
Yeah.
I think
Caesar,
I
this
know
is a
who
question,
you are.
Direct question for you. So our members a lot of our members are exposed to diesel fuel
Yes.
and steel dust.
Yes.
Are you guys documenting any of that work? And CBTU out of New York want to be able to connect directly with WEAC to deal with that issue.
Okay, so that's a question for me. Data mining.
Okay, sure. I will try to do data mining. So actually, just a very brief response to that is that you're right on point in terms of asking that question. And there's a group of folks that are specifically focusing on that. And I can, if you email me, jpatterson@naacpnet.org, I can give you more on that group. But because people are very concerned about the disappearance of data, we're putting together Cold-Blooded 2.0, and all the data has come down off of the EPA site. And there's a lot that's going on that's making data difficult these days because of the obstruction that's going on. So I can share with you more about folks who are working actively against that. Thank you.
And the part of the question about how do we hold government accountable, that's about organizing. And so you've heard all of us talk about that, and Did you want to say something, Donnell, to that? Or yes, no, quick? But you got to do it. Okay. That's about organizing, and that's something else that we need to band together with CBTU around. And it's only through organizing and creating real accountability for many of the elected officials or government agencies and decision makers that we actually get change. That's the Bus Riders Union campaign in LA. That's what went on in Detroit with Marathon Oil and the refineries. That's what Jackie is doing with regards to Cold-Blooded and the reports. We have to be fueled by data so that our advocacy is really on point. And then we have to have strong organizing campaigns that have a strategy that let us know when we need to escalate, how we need to escalate, who our targets are, and being really clear about what our demands are. TWU over here's question. Yes, we certainly stand with Local 100. Yes, we have obviously been in the fight around the diesel fuel and launched our Dump Dirty Diesel campaign several years ago. The steel dust issue, TWU Local 100 did present to us as an issue, and we tried to work together and getting a grant from the federal government to do some more study of that particular issue. I know it remains an issue, and I will come back to you right now, and we will connect once again, because I love TWU Local 100. I've loved all of your leadership, and so thank you all very much. I'm sorry we are out of time for questions. Can I? Couple more. The boss has just said I can take a couple more questions. She just said I can take a couple more questions. You got me to go? Okay. Okay.
So
I can tell.
All right, thank you.
All right. So I'm hearing that some people are in trouble. I'm hearing that I can take more questions, but I have to tell you that this conversation will be continued today at 3:15 p.m. The room will be announced later today, so just pay attention and look for it. And we can take, oh yeah, right, see? We can take two
Point of personal
questions.
privilege,
Let me
Mr. Chairman.
respond.
The two questions.
Can I
Point of
respond?
personal privilege.
I think I got to take the questions. Yes. Who's running this meeting?
The parliamentarian is sitting here at the right-hand corner, and the chair is Sister Thomas over there.
Madam
So I'm
Brown.
asking for a point of personal privilege.
What do I do?
We have people who actually.
Yes.
The privilege that I'm asking for, sir, is this. We have a number of trade union organizations in this room who are trying to learn and be more involved in the issue of climate and climate change. And as they come to the mic and ask questions that are specific to the industries that they represent, I only ask that the chair hear them clearly instead of blocking what they are trying to explain to you so that they can get their voices heard. I thank you for that point of privilege.
Thank you. What we will do, the chair has heard you, and what we will do, we're asking that you ask your question, not give no whole long statement, because we must respect, one, the time, and two, those panelists and congressional members who are waiting. And so we will, everyone that is standing at a mic now will get the opportunity to ask a question.
Question.
I will ask the question, Mr. Chairman.
Wait. Excuse me. I've been standing here for a long time, y'all. Y'all say you want to respond.
Yes. What is the... Go to number 3. Someone...
Thank you. So my question is this. With
Yes.
regards to climate change, and we know that we're facing the ongoing fight against the deregulation of the energy field and its effects, right?
Mm-hmm.
And does CBTU have a coordinated campaign against that? And if so, what is it?
Does CBTU have a coordinated campaign around the issue of the energy effects and how we sort of transition? I can't answer that.
I don't think so, but I think under the advisement of your question, we will talk to the chair, one, about that. Also, let me state, there are arrangements being made that this discussion can continue. If the panelist is available, we will identify the location once the staff determines where we can have this conversation.
Number 6? Okay. Number
Yes,
6.
my name's Larry Spencer. I'm also a vice president for the United Mine Workers out of District 20. And I'm also a president for Alabama CBTU. And I yield my time back to James Gibbs at Mike 1.
Okay. Thank you. So, okay, I'm being instructed to go to number 5.
I'm a sister at the microphone. I like to speak, and I like for everyone to listen. Thank you, because we're respecting each other, right?
Yes.
My name is Michelle Gilliam, and I'm the Political and Legislative Director of TWU Local 100. I'm a proud colleague of Charles Jenkins, and he expressed already what a lot of what I was going to say. But I also, my question is basically because we represent transit workers, and I am wondering in the increased advocacy for blue-green initiatives, like the Green New Deal, if there is opportunity to expound on the need to grow public transportation, because one of the biggest ways we can make environment more just and save the environment is to expand public transportation and get more people out of their cars. And we all know that Black, brown, and working class people are disproportionately dependent on public transportation. So my question is, and if there is a coordinated campaign that comes out of this through CBTU, if we can really highlight the need to expand public transportation.
Do you want to touch on that, Eric? Yes.
Yeah, I'd like to speak to both sides very quickly. For those of you who feel frightened about the loss of your jobs, the three of us up here are not taking them away. I work for General Motors. They closed down all the plants. When I was there, I loved my job, and they closed down the Ford Milpitas plant, and I didn't do it. Then I moved to GM Southgate, the center of Black jobs in LA. They closed it down, and I didn't do it. Then they closed down Goodyear, they closed down Firestone, they closed down every place that Black people worked. And I went to GM Van Nuys, and I built a movement to keep that plant open for 10 years. And I worked on that assembly line for 10 years. So let's have a little bit of understanding that if it's not the environmental movement that's going to take away your jobs, it's the system that doesn't even want you. So don't get mad at me if they don't, I'm sorry, because we got to be real that I feel your pain. When I was laid off, I was heartbroken because I know what it's like. The auto workers love making cars. But some things are going to have to change. But this is going to be an important conversation. The second thing I want to say is that, as you were saying, sister, if we can get 1,000 more buses in LA, there's about 20 jobs per bus. Drivers, mechanics, clerical workers, free public transportation is going to be a working class job. And that's what we're fighting for in LA. It's an environmental, it's a racial justice, an economic justice. So let us get ahead of some of these economic transitions instead of being afraid of them.
So Mr. James is the last person.
Okay, really, I'm gonna make a quick statement. It's not when you say that you don't affect jobs. I want you to think about this. Economically, I want you to think about this. You are affecting jobs. When we lose these coal jobs, you lose steel, making of steel in this country. You lose the auto jobs because now we're buying parts and different things from other countries. You are affecting our jobs. Now, I've asked politicians this time in and time out. Tell me, if you give away these middle class jobs and you try to fight and you're not fighting to help us keep them, then you tell me how are you going to replace them with flipping hamburgers? And yes, we got a lot of McDonald's in the Black neighborhood, and you'll see our kids are full of them. So don't say that you're not affecting our communities when you're taking and trying to do away with these middle class jobs. Mine workers used to be one of the largest unions in this country. We had people from the south of Mississippi and all these places coming in to these coal fields. Now, they had to leave them because they lost these jobs. Coal is not doing this. Coal is not pulling these triggers in Chicago. Coal is not rusting the pipes out in Flint, Michigan. I'm asking you for your help that we have got to work to say, I'm a third generation coal miner. My father worked 52 years underground. was the first African American to own and operate his own coal mines, union mines. Now, I'm telling you, we keep talking about how our unions are deteriorating. This is the reason. We have got to stop fighting, and we got to stop letting people use us to talk about how it's coming into the black community. How many people are affected? I want somebody to tell me, California is the most polluted state in this country. Tell me how many coal mines are in California. Tell me how many electric power plants, coal plants are in California. Not a one. They buy their coal from other states. So folks, I'm not trying to be disruptive here in this convention. We are trying to fight for our livelihood in these coal fields. I speak for these coal miners. I will always speak for our union, and I thank CBTU for giving me a chance to conflict a little bit of what you all are saying. I'm just telling you, I'm here to fight for these unions. I'm here to fight for these jobs.
Thank you.
And you ought to look around to see how many jobs being affected by it.
Okay. Because, Mr. Vice President, because of your concerns, this particular panel will be continued at 3:15 p.m. to 4:45 p.m. in the Baker Room. Because of your concerns, we will continue this conversation at 3:15 p.m. in the Baker Room. Thank you, panelists.
Thank you all.